What is up, guys? Fahir here from AwesomeTudes.com, and let us now create our player damage script so that we can allow our enemies to deal damage to our player. So in the player scripts folder, we are going to right click and we are going to create a new C# script, which we are going to call player damage. And we need to attach it on the player himself. So select the player and drag and drop our player damage on him. But we do need to hit apply so that the change applies to the prefab. And now let me just double click and open it here in Mono Behavior, actually Mono Develop, excuse me. So you know what I need to do now. And I'm not even going to say what I'm doing. I am just gonna do it because you already know what I'm doing, and now we can continue. So what do we need in our player damage script? First of all, we need to get a reference to our UI text element that is going to display how many lives we have left. You see this one right here. Now, the name of this UI element is live text. So copy the name here from the hierarchy, copy the name, go in Mono Develop, and here we're going to say private text. So text, and we're going to say this live text. But we do need to remember that type using Unity Engine, so Unity Engine .ui, or otherwise this will not work because the text is in the UI framework. So now we can use the text and all other UI elements inside of our script. We also need a private int life score count to count how many lives we have, and we need a private boolean that is going to allow us to apply damage. So we are going to say here can damage. Now what is this variable? You know that in those platformer games, when you receive damage to your player and the player starts like blinking and he goes transparent and back and forth between transparent and not being transparent, and while that happens he cannot receive any damage. Well, we are going to create that same effect, because if we allow our enemies to deal damage to the player every second, he can be stuck between two enemies and die in an instant. So we are not going to allow that. Now inside of the awake function, we are going to say live text is equal to get component, or actually, excuse me, we're going to say game object dot find, and find the game object with the live text name dot get component, and now we're going to get the text component from it. Now our live score count is by default equal to 3, and our live text dot text is equal to like this plus live score count in order for us to set the initial score for the lives. And can damage will be equal to true so that we can apply damage to the player right away. Now inside of our function that we're going to create, which is going to be public, so public deal damage, this is how we are going to name it. Here we are going to, and I forgot void, so public void deal damage, we are going to apply damage to the player, subtract from the life score count. So we're going to say here life score count minus minus like this. If our life score count, so life score count is not less than 0. So if it's not equal to, let's say for example, -1. So -1, or if it's greater than 0, something like this, greater or equal to 0, then we are going to call our live text dot text to preview it. Now, why am I saying if our live score text is greater or equal to 0? Well, you know that we have 3 lives, and here I'm saying minus minus. Minus minus is a shortcut for writing live score count is equal to live score count minus 1. So minus, not equals to 1, but minus 1 like this. Now this right here is a shortcut. This minus minus is a shortcut for typing all of this right here. You see how better it is to use these shortcuts? So our live score count is equal to live score count minus 1. This is what minus minus means. Plus plus, on the other hand, means, well, same thing, but here is plus. So it means the same exact thing. So now we are subtracting from our live score count. So we're subtracting from it, and we're going to preview that to our user, but we're not going to preview the negative live score. If the live score count is greater or equal to 0, so if his value is greater or equal to 0, we will preview that live score count. And going back here, If our life score count is equal to 0, then we are going to, well, end or restart the game right here. And we are also going to wait a certain amount of time before we can apply damage to our player again. Now, all of this right here is going to happen if can damage. So if we can deal damage to our player, we are going to subtract from the life score. Then we are going to test if the life score is greater or equal to 0 and preview that score. And then we're going to test if the life score count is equal to 0 to restart the game. Meanwhile, we cannot do that. Now, in order to wait a couple of minutes or seconds, excuse me, not minutes, but seconds, we need an IEnumerator. So IEnumerator, which we are going to say wait for damage like this. Here we're gonna say yield, return, new, wait for seconds. Let's say we're gonna wait 2 seconds before we can deal damage to the player. Now, of course, here inside of this if statement, we need to say can damage is now equal to false. So that now here we can say can damage is equal to true. And this is where we are going to start the coroutine, which is, or actually, excuse me, here is where we are going to start the coroutine outside of our can damage. So here we're going to say start coroutine and we're going to say wait for damage like this. Or maybe is it better to put it in the if statement? I think it will be safer to put it in the if statement because this public void deal damage function can still be called. And when it's called, it will execute what's inside of this function. But if this here is not true, it will not execute the if statement. What's outside of this if statement will be executed. So I do think it is safer to put the coroutine right here inside of the if statement. Now, in order for this, so that we can test it out, we do need to go, for example, in the snail script. Here we can apply damage to the player. So if we are not stunned, what we are going to do, we're going to say here right hit dot game object or collider dot game object dot get component, and we're going to say player damage, and we are going to say here dot deal damage to deal damage to the player. Now I'm going to copy this from dot collider.game object and paste it right here for the left hit, and .collider.game object.get component .deal damage. So let's test it out. If I go here in Unity, when we first run the game, we should see that we have 3 lives. And let me just take the snail and I'm gonna, turn off the snail so that we only have the beetle. Notice now when the beetle touches the player, so it should apply damage to the player. Just take a look at here. Yeah, we did apply damage to the player and our beetle was like getting stuck on these colliders. So we need to add that physics material on the beetle so that it does not get stuck on our colliders. Anyway, just apply that physics material that we added here. Let me just find it where it is. So let me just move from the beetle. Here in the physics material, no friction, add that to the beetle and test it out so that the beetle does not collide with the ground. But we saw that our beetle could deal damage to our player. Let's go here and turn off the beetle and let's add the frog. Actually, we are gonna activate the frog, but that's the same thing. What we are gonna do for the frog is go in the frog script and right here we are gonna create a public layer mask, which is going to be our player layer, and inside of the update function, so void update, we are going to test by overlapping a circle. So if physics 2D overlap circle at transform position, which is the position of our frog, let's say 0.5 for the radius and player layer for the mask. If this happens, so what we're going to do, we are going to find our player. So let me just go here and add the finishing parenthesis. We're going to find the player in our updates. So we're going to say game object. So game object dot find, and we can find the player, but we can also do one more thing. We can go here and we can say private game object player like this, and find the player in the awake or in the start. So we can do that in the start. So we can say our player is equal to game object, find game object with the tag my tags dot player tag. So now we have a reference to the player. Here is our player. And here, when we detect collision by overlapping a circle at this position using this radius, And checking for game objects that are on this layer, we can simply call our player.getComponent. So get component, which is going to be our player damage dot deal damage like this. But we need to go inside of our Unity and we need to select our frog, and for the player layer, we need to select the actual player's layer and make sure that the player is set on that layer, which is indeed true. Take the frog parent and hit apply. So now when I hit the play button, and when the frog jumps on the player, you see it dealt damage. You see now we have 2 lives only left right here. So we see that the frog can also deal damage to the player. And now bam, you see only 1 life left for our player. Bam, now he had 0. So that works nicely. Let me just turn off the frog. We have the bird left. So we have the bird and we have the spider. Now, it's pretty easy for them. You have the spider, which is in the box collider 2D. It has, well, the trigger checked. What you can do is simply go inside of this script and in our on trigger enter. When we collide with the player, what you're gonna do, so if target.tag is equal to my tags, not moo tag, it's my tags, not coin tag, but the player tag like this. So if we collide with the player, you are simply going to say target.getComponent, which is going to be our player damage, dot deal damage, and voila, this is it. For the bird, however, the egg is the one who deals the damage, and we already are testing that here. So if the target game object tag is equal to my player tag, we are going to do what? We're simply going to say target.gameObject, get the component, which is our player damage, and deal damage to the player. It's simple as that. So we are applying or dealing damage to the player. The last thing that is left for us to do is here when we were, well, when the life score count is equal to 0, we can make the player like fall down or something like that, or we can simply remove him from our game. Or we can stop the game. In order to stop the game, you can say time.timescale is equal to 1f or actually 0f. This is going to start the game or stop the game and nothing is going to move. When you set the time scale to 0, that means that everything in the game will stop working. It will freeze. So you can do that. You can also restart the level. Now, in order for us to restart the level, we need to do something like this. We need to type using Unity Engine dot scene management. Now the scene management is the one who manages the scene. Remember when I said that inside of our scenes is where we are going to put our game objects, where we are going to have our actual game. This is a scene. This is what you see here where we have our player and all of our enemies. This is called a scene. Now, in order to restart the game, you need to reload the scene. And here you can simply add using Unity Engine Scene Management. And then here you can restart the game. Now you can use a coroutine, for example. We can go here and say enumerator, restart game, something like this. We can say yield, return, you wait for seconds. We can wait, for example, 2 seconds, and we can call our scene manager dot load scene, and we can reload our same scene. Now the name of the scene is gameplay, and you pass the name here as a string. But one important thing is that if you want to load a scene or use it, you need to go here inside of file, then build settings, and then you need to click on add open scenes. So now you see here scenes in the build, we have our scenes gameplay, which is the current scene we are in. If you have another scene, you need to go to that scene and click on add open scenes, and it will add it here. If the scene is not added here, it will not load and you will get an error. So you need to add the scenes you want to use in your game right here in the scenes in build. So if I go back here, so we have restart game, we can call something like start coroutine, restart game, like this. And should I stop the game before we do that? So we can say time.timescale is equal to 0f, and we can test it out by setting the life score count to 1. So when we receive only 1 damage, our player will die and the time scale will stop and we will restart the game. So if we go back in Unity, let me just test that out by going here. Come on, when this falls on the player or when the spider touches the player. So let's try this. Actually, yeah, it fell on the player and bam, you see the game has stopped. Now we have one problem, and this is what I wanted to show you. That is, if we go back here, we are calling restart game, but the time scale is set to 0. This return new wait for seconds is dependent on this time scale. This is a good thing to know because I saw a lot of people have troubles with it. So I am going to, well, show you this with a practical example. You see here, the time scale is 0, which means that this right here will not count. It will not count these 2 seconds because the time has stopped in our game. For that, we need to use wait for seconds real time. You see here, creates a yield instruction to wait for a given number of seconds using unscaled time, which means time that is independent from the time scale. Now, this is also one thing that I wanted to show you because this time scale controls the time in the game. And when it's set to 0, everything stops. And we saw that by real world example just a moment ago. So we can use wait for seconds real time, which is independent from the time scale. So it's not dependent on the time scale. Even if the time scale is set to 0, this will count down. And of course, stupid as I am, I put wait for seconds real time in wait for damage. It needs to go here in the restart game, and here it's wait for seconds. So in wait for damage, we have wait for seconds, but here is wait for seconds real time because we are calling the restart game to restart our game. And this is the coroutine that needs to have the wait for seconds independent from the time scale itself. So if we go back here in Unity now and test it out, so let me just stop Unity and reload the Unity again. So notice now when the bird drops the egg on our player, come on, drop it, and bam, it hits the player. We should wait 2 seconds, and bam, you see we have restarted our game. But the point here is, again, and I'm showing you this by real world examples. You see the game has stopped. What is this? Well, here, if we go back, we set the time scale to 0. And the time scale is 0. We have restarted the game, but the time scale is set to 0. So we need to set the time scale back to 1. We can do it in the start function of our player damage. So void start. We can say time dot time scale is equal to 1 again, so that our game can start. Now I'm showing you all of this with a real world example because this are some problems that I saw students have and they don't understand what is going on. Well, when you set the time scale to 0, always, you need to have a code where it will set it back to 1, or otherwise you saw the game was paused, it was not working. So the game has stopped and restarted the game, and again the game was like frozen. It did not work. So because of that, we need to set the time scale back to 1. Now, if we try this again, I am gonna make the spider hit the player. So you see the spider has touched the player. We restarted the game, and notice now everything is okay. Everything works. Everything is fine. So this is how you restart the level. And this is why real world examples are important, because I showed you that with a real world example, the problem that you will encounter and how you can fix that problem. So only these 2 tips and tricks that we learned, wait for seconds real time, and that we need to set back the time scale back to 1, are worth gold. And we saw that with a real world example. So we explained everything what is going on here. We already did all of these things, and we just called our player receive damage inside of our enemy's scripts. So, Fahir here from AwesomeTudes.com. I will see you guys in the next video.